Shua Tov, everybody. This week we'll be doing something a little bit differently. Since it's Purim, I'm going to Mitzvah Hashem give a shiur that I've given many times before regarding what I consider the major themes on the Purim holiday. But B'li towards the end of the shiur, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'll try to relate it somewhat to a section of this week's Parsha, Parshat Tzav. And what I'd like to start with is basically looking at many of the halachot of this holiday of Purim, and to notice that almost in every halacha, I have some type of difficulty with the halacha. The first halacha is Siman Taf Reish Pei Vav in Orach Chaim, halacha beis. The Mechaber says, Mis'anim b'Yud Gimel ba'Adar. We fast on the 13th of Adar, the day before Purim. There's a fast day called Tanit Esther. Now, what problem could I possibly have with that? Why is there a fast day? In general, the holiday of Purim is a happy occasion. The Jews were in trouble. HaKadosh Baruch Hu came to our rescue. A tremendous miracle occurred, and we were saved. Not only were we saved, we were catapulted to the leadership of the strongest empire of the time, of the ruling empire of the world during the time of the Purim story. It's a time for celebration. Why do Jews always have to feel guilty that they won, and they have to mix it with a fast day? Why can't we simply be happy that we won, have a joyous holiday where we eat and drink, and that's it? So question number one, why the need? Now, you might want to say, of course, simple answer, well, it's reminiscent of the 3-day fast that Esther made. That would be nice, except the fast of Esther for those 3 days occurred during the month of Nisan, 11 months before the Purim story, rather than during the month of Adar. Another simple answer might be to say, well, when the Jews went to war, they had a minhag to fast, and they went to war on the 13th of Adar, and that's why we have the Taanis Esther. That's true, but they went to war on Hanukkah as well. They went to other places, and yet we don't record a fast day. So question number one, again, why is there a fast day in conjunction with the holiday of Purim? Second, Siman Taf Reish Pei Zayin, halacha aleph. Chayav adam likrot hamegillah balayla. A person is obligated to read the Megillah at night. V'lachzor u'shnosa b'yom. And you have to go back and read it a second time during the day. Now, this is something that we've done since we were children, and we know that the Megillah is read twice. The question, of course, is, however, why? In a month from now, we are going to be celebrating an even greater story, probably the greatest story in Jewish history, the story of our exodus from Egypt. And there is a Torah obligation, L'saper b'yitzias Mitzrayim, to tell the story of the night we left Egypt. That will be on the 15th of Nisan. And yet, how many times are we obligated to tell that story? Just once. Of course, the more we tell the story, the longer we expand on it, the more ideas that we bring up, the better. And we really shouldn't run through it, but technically speaking, you only have to read it once. Why is this rabbinic story of Purim that much different that we have to read it twice? It's not enough to read it once during the day. And the second question in regard to this halacha, what would happen if I am pressed for time during the day? For those of us who came to the United States, Purim for many people was a regular work day. And maybe the schedule, I don't know how to read a Megillah on my own. Maybe no one else knew how to read a Megillah. I need to go to the shul. The time that the shul is having minyan, it conflicts with my work schedule. Would a person be able to read the Megillah twice at night? Okay, you have to read the Megillah twice. I'll read it twice. I'll go to the regular minyan, and then I'll stay when they're having the women's Megillah reading afterwards. I'll listen it again a second time. And I would say, similar to there's an obligation to read the Parshat twice a week. There's no, it doesn't have to be at a specific day at a specific time. As long as you read it twice during the week, you're Yotzei. But that's not true. It's not, the halacha doesn't just say you have to read it twice. It says that to read it once at night, the second reading has to be done dafka during the day. The question is why? Next halach, Simen Taf Reish Peichet, halacha Aleph. Krachim hamukafim choma mimos Yeshua ben Nun, walled cities that were walled from the time of Yeshua ben Nun, afilu einam mukafim achshav, even if they are not walled now, korim b'tesvav. They read the Megillah and celebrate Purim on the 15th of Adar, not on the 14th of Adar. And this is what we call today the holiday of Shushan Purim. Again, strange. Okay, there was a problem in Persia. The Jews saw the problem. The rabbis got down together. Esther convinced them there was a need to commemorate what occurred, and they made a rabbinic holiday of Purim. Where do we ever have a scenario where in part of the world, holiday is celebrated on one date, and in another part of the world, the holiday is celebrated on a different date? There is no such occurrence in the Jewish calendar. So why in the world, when the rabbis decided to commemorate what occurred during the time of Mordechai and Esther, determine what day, either the 14th or the 15th, determine what day it will be, and the entire Jewish world will celebrate Purim on that day, and that's it. Why was it done in two separate days? And why was it significant that who celebrates on the 15th rather than the 14th? Those cities would have a wall around it. Who cares? Now, it's true, if we're going to look back for a historical reason why there would be even a Havamina that we should celebrate in 2 different days. Well, the first Purim was celebrated on 2 separate days. Normally, the rule was that what had happened was Haman had gotten a law passed that there was one day, it would be the 13th of Adar, where it would be you could persecute a Jew without fear that the government was going to come and hold you responsible for what you do. You could steal his property, you can beat the Jew up, you would probably be able to even kill a Jew and not be held responsible as long as you did it within the 24 hours of the 13th of Adar. And that's what happened. Subsequently, when Haman fell from power and Mordechai and Esther rose to power, they could not get that law annulled. The only thing they could do was have a counter law that not only would the enemies of the Jews have free reign during the 13th of Adar, the Jews also would be able to wage war against their enemies and also not be responsible for whoever they killed or whatever damage they occurred to them, and let the stronger man win. And that's exactly what happened. But at the end of that 24 hours, Achashverosh made a magnanimous gesture to Esther. What else can I do for you, my dear? And she asked us, can you do me a favor? Could we extend the ability of the Jewish people to defend themselves for another 24 hours? Give us another day where we're not responsible for whatever damage we do to our enemies. And that was held only to Shushan, because in Shushan, 24 hours wasn't enough time to get all the work done and to destroy the enemies of the Jewish people. And Achashverosh said, fine. So the first Purim, everybody fought on the 13th of Adar. Most of the 127 provinces rested and celebrated on the 14th of Adar. In Shushan, they needed the next day. They fought both on the 13th and the 14th, and they celebrated on the 15th. Okay. So then logically, logically would have been still, let's sit down and vote 14th or 15th, the whole world celebrate the same day. And if you're going to decide to say, you know what, no, we're Jews, everybody wants to celebrate the day they originally celebrated, so the whole world should celebrate on the 14th. And in Shushan, they celebrate on the 15th. That would have been logical. No. We're going to have every city, not only Shushan, and what was unique about Shushan, had a wall around it. Why does having a wall around it make it unique? Okay, so then just simply say it. Any city that has a wall around it will celebrate with Shushan, so it shouldn't celebrate alone. But no, So listen to the way that the question is formulated in the Mishnah Berurah. It would have been proper for the rabbis to make a decree. Any city that had a wall around it, like Shushan, will be similar and compared to Shushan. That they will celebrate Purim on the 15th rather than on the 14th. The kavod should have been associated with the city of Shushan. And the way they should have made the takana was shekol ir shehimukefet choma yemos Achashverosh. Any city that had a wall around it during the time of the Purim story, during the days of Achashverosh, Yikru b'tetvav, they read the Megillah not on the 14th but on the 15th. Ach kevan she'eretz Yisrael ha'isa chareva ba'osa eitz. But since at that point in time, right, the Purim story occurs approximately 70 years after the destruction of Bayit Rishon, of the first Holy Temple. So since at that time, the Eretz Yisrael was in a state of destruction, so that there would be cities in Chutz Haaretz more prominent than cities that were in Eretz Yisrael. There were major cities with walls, fortified walls around them in Chul, but nothing in Eretz Yisrael. And if we would make the decree that cities that had a wall around it then would read on the 15th, it would sort of focus and spotlight the fact that Eretz Yisrael was a state of destruction because there would be no cities in Eretz Yisrael celebrating on the 15th. Al Kain Tiknu Lichvod Eretz Yisrael. Therefore, they decided to make the decree in a way that would give honor to the land of Israel. And what did they say? Shekol ir shehimukefet nimot Yeshua ben Nun yikru b'tetvav. That it, not that any city that had a wall around it from the time of Achashverosh, because there were no cities in Yerushalayim, in Israel, that had a wall around it at the time of Achashverosh. So they said, who will celebrate on the 15th? What is the determining factor? Any city that had a wall around it during the time of Yeshua ben Nun. And that's true even if now, during the time of the Persian Empire, they did not have a wall around it. Vashar b'Yud and everybody else would read on the 14th. Now again, okay, they want to give kavod to Eretz Yisrael, but they didn't say, you know what, any city that had a wall around it pre-Churban Bayit Rishon, any city that had a wall around it 80 years ago, 100 years ago. Okay, if that would be the case, that'd be fine. They went all the way back to Yoshua ben Nun. And why specifically Yoshua ben Nun? He says, but now there's a problem. The whole reason why we celebrate on the 15th rather than 14th started with the fact that in Shushan, they celebrated originally on the 15th. And therefore, you made a holiday to honor that fact. But the way you define which cities celebrate on the 15th, you leave off one interesting city, Shushan itself. Shushan itself did not have a wall around it at the time of Yoshua ben Nun. So based on the definition, Shushan would be reading on the 14th. And therefore, says the Mishnah Berurah, Levad Shushan. They had to make an exception for Shushan. They grandfathered it in. Af al pi she'eno mukefet mimot Yeshua ben Nun, even though Shushan did not have a wall around it during the time of Yeshua ben Nun, afilu hachi karim b'tetvav, they also read on the 15th, b'pnei shabo na'aseh hanes, because it was in that city that the nes occurred, and that originally they celebrated on the 15th. So the question, of course, comes in again. Now we're expanding the question. Not only why did they have two different days? Why couldn't they just make a unified holiday for everybody? Why were walled cities significant? Why going back to the time of Yeshua ben Nun? And especially why go back to Yeshua ben Nun when the definition itself doesn't include Shushan? That's Meshuggah. And even if you wanted to give kavod to Eretz Yisrael, so you don't have to go back to the time of Yeshua ben Nun. Go back 100 years when probably even Shushan had a wall, then you'd have no problem. The definition would include Shushan. He wouldn't need to be grandfathered in. Question. Next, Siman Tafresh Sadi Dalet. Chayv Kaladon Litein Lefachot Shtei Matanot Shnei Aniyim. Ta'alach Matanas Lavyonim. So you'll say, what could he probably find difficult about this halacha? I'll tell you why. There is a difficulty. We have an obligation to give tzedakah every day of the year. It's a mitzvah always to give tzedakah, and especially when a holiday is coming up, and it doesn't matter what the holiday is, whether it's Pesach, and we're worried about people having food for the Seder, whether it's Rosh Hashanah, whether it's Sukkot. In general, we should be even more concerned that families have the means to be able to celebrate the holiday. There is no special tzedakah halacha by other holidays. I mean, you might want to say Pesach has mos chitim, maybe. Okay, but generally speaking, that's also, we're just making sure that people have their basic needs for the holiday. But a unique and special holiday halacha of tzedakah for Purim, why? Right? For example, no, any other day of the year, if I give money to one ani, I'm yotzei the mitzvah tzedakah. I've given tzedakah. But on Purim day, if I only give tzedakah to one person, I have not fulfilled my tzedakah obligation. I mean, it's a nice thing I did. Maybe I fulfilled the general mitzvah of tzedakah, but I haven't fulfilled the specific Purim obligation of tzedakah. I only fulfill it if I give to two ani. Right? And even if I give $100 to one ani, I'm not yotzei. But if I gave two people each $1, then I am yotzei. Why? Why do I need a special Purim halacha of tzedakah? Question. Next, Siman Tafresh Tzadi Hey, halacha beis. Chayiv inish lebesumei b'paraya. Person is obligated, and for lack of a better translation, to get intoxicated on Purim. Ad lo yada vein Or Haman leBaruch Mordechai. So you don't know the difference between Or Haman and Baruch Mordechai. That's the machaber. That's tradition of the Sfardim. Comes along the Ramah to quote the Psak for Ashkenazim. The Yesh Omrim, those that say, "The ain't tzarich lishtaker kol kach." You don't have to get so intoxicated. Ela yishte yoter milimudo. Just drink a little bit more than is your normal custom. V'yashen, and then you'll go to sleep. When we talk shiyashen, eino yodea bein Or Haman leBaruch Mordechai. And if you're asleep, then you won't know the difference between Or Haman and Baruch Mordechai. You won't be awake. And then he says, probably realizing that this will be the one time that Ashkenazim are not going to paskin like the Ramah, but everybody's going to paskin like the Mechaber. He says, Ve'echer hamarbe, ve'echer hamamnit, and whether you drink a lot, or whether you drink just a little, u'bovad shechavein libo lashamayim. Where your kavana in drinking has to be l'shem shamayim, not simply to have a good time and get drunk. What difficulty do we have that this halacha, taken simply, in its simple pshat, seems to go everything that we believe on the other 364 days of the year. A Jew doesn't believe that getting intoxicated is appropriate behavior. We always have to be in a situation where we're clear thinking, we're able to make intelligent decisions, and to get into that stage where we're so inebriated, we're not allowed to daven under those circumstances. We're not allowed to say brachas in those circumstances. Why in the world is there one day during the year that not only is it permitted to get intoxicated, but it's considered an obligation to get intoxicated? How do you explain such a thing? Doesn't seem to jive with what we would consider proper Jewish etiquette. Last halacha, Siman Tafresh Sadi Hey halacha Dalet, Chayav l'shloach l'chavero shtei manot basar or shtei minei ochlim. We're obligated to send either two types of meat or other types of food. Shneimar u'mishloach manot ish l'reyehu shtei matanot ish echad. Not only do we have a mitzvah, matanas levyonim, there is another mitzvah that we are obligated to perform on Purim. That's the mitzvah of shloach manot. We send gifts to people, not necessarily people who need the gifts, not necessarily even people who may want the gifts, people who are maybe at a much higher financial status than I'm at. Why? Especially when we're talking a month before Pesach. Why do I want 50 people bringing me chametz, which I'll no way be able to finish off in a month? I probably wouldn't be able to finish off in 3 or 4 months. Who needs it? Who wants it? Why is there such an obligation? 2 more things just to add on to this, which have nothing to do with necessarily halacha, but they have to do with minhagim. One is there's a custom to get dressed up. There's a custom to get dressed up in costumes, pun intended, I guess. Where does that come from? How does that fit in to the meaning of Purim? Most minhagim have some type of connection to the holiday. What is the connection? And B, there is a minhag. It's got to be a minhag with food, right? God forbid there should be a Jewish holiday where we don't have a special type of food that goes along with the celebration of the holiday. We have a minhag to eat what we call either hamantashen, or here in Israel we call it aznei haman. What is the symbolism of eating aznei haman? We know, for example, on Hanukkah, when we eat sufganiyot or we eat latkes, so then it's because these foods are made by frying in oil. It reminds us of the miracle of the pach shemen, of the crucible of oil that they found in the base of Mikdash. So there's a connection to a major theological theme of the holiday. What is the connection of hamantashen? And if we have time, we'll see also the question why not what we do, but what we don't do. Why don't we recite Hallel on Purim? We may or may not be able to get to that. Okay, let's look ready for some answers. And we're gonna go through the answers ironically, by looking at the minhag of wearing costume. Where does the minhag of wearing costume possibly come from? And there's no definite thing. I'm just making my own personal suggestion. I think it comes from the Gemara in Megillah on Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph. The Gemara in Megillah there says that when Achashverosh came to the party that he threw, he showed up in a Purim costume. What was he wearing? He was wearing the big day kahuna, the clothes of the Kohen Gadol that they had ransacked when the Persians destroyed the first temple, and he took them out and he showed up dressed up in the big day kahuna. And the Gemara proves that. How do we know that that's true, says the Gemara? Because it says in the Megillah, Yakar tiferet gedulato, his party was made to demonstrate the splendor and the greatness of his kingdom. Uksiv hasam, and it's written regarding the big day kahuna, lechavod ul tifares. So the word tiferet is used in Parshat Tzav to talk about the big day kahuna. The word tiferet is used to talk about the splendor of the party and the palace that Achashverosh lived in. Obviously, it means he showed the splendor of the big day kahuna. So we wear costumes because Achashverosh showed up to the Purim story in a costume. What are we supposed to? Okay, great. But what are we? Historically, it might be true, but what message is conveyed by that? Why do we today remember that custom by our putting on costumes? So I think what we have to ask ourselves when we look at the Megillah of Purim, we read through the story, the first question the Jew has to ask himself is, why did the Jewish people get themselves in such a deep trap that there was a decree made by the government possibly lead to the Rahman al-Islam, to the final solution of the Jewish people? What did they do wrong to deserve such a decree? And we're talking, it's not as if they haven't suffered enough in the last 70 years. These people, some of them may have either lived through the destruction of the first temple, which in itself, imagine if we look at pictures going on in the Ukraine, that picture must be minimally what occurred in Yerushalayim. Thousands and thousands of Jews were murdered. And that wasn't enough. And they were exiled to Persia and to Iran. Ironically, again, Iran and Israel, deal with the Purim story. And now Haman is successful to have the government, who basically the king who ruled over the entire civilized world, make a decree that Jews can be killed without anybody being punished. What happened? What did they do? What did they do wrong to deserve this? So the Megillah doesn't really tell us. What does it tell us in the beginning? The first parak of the Megillah, interesting enough, goes into somewhat detail describing the party that Achashverosh threw. Why? Why do I need to know, the furniture and the type of furniture that he had and the menu that was presented there and why? Why is that important? The drapes. There's one other point, though, however, that's very interesting to know. The date of the party. The party wasn't made when Achashverosh rose to power. The party was made by Bishnat Shalosh L'Malcho, the third year of his reign. Why the third year of his reign? That's the key in understanding what's going on here. The mistake that the Jews made was going to the party. That was such a monumental mistake that they deserved, Rahman al-Islam, to be destroyed. Now, what could be so wrong about going to the party? I mean, you could say, well, it's treif, your mom's going to a treif party, it must be eating treif, and maybe, there maybe wasn't such tsunua. Well, first of all, it was very tsunua, probably more tsunua than Jewish affairs, because it was separate. Men and women had separate parties in separate rooms. They weren't together. It wasn't co-ed. And as far as kashrus is concerned, the pasuk says, "Va'ashtia kadat eino nes, ki kein yisad hamelech kora beito, lasot kirson ish va'ish." Achashverosh sent out a questionnaire. You filled out, do you have any dietary requests? Do you want vegan? Do you want vegetarian? Or you have gluten issues? What about, do you want kosher? And what type of kosher? Is Rabbanut good enough for you, or do you want Mahadran? And what level of Mahadran? Do you want to order plastic cutlery, and or is it all right if you take to China? Does your food have to be double wrapped before we put it into the microwave? Right? These are all the questions, and you could fill in whatever you want, and whatever you requested, you got. So then, if it was kosher and there was no problem of tznius issues, so what was the problem? The problem was why? What was the celebration about? It was the third year. Why after the third year of his reign? So according to Chazal, he was celebrating the fact that, according to his calculation, the 70 years prophesied by Yirmiyahu. Yirmiyahu said that the Jews would come back to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash and come back to Eretz Yisrael 70 years after their exile. According to his calculation, the 70 years had come and gone. The Jews weren't going anywhere. And he didn't want to let the Jews go anywhere. They were very important to his realm. And the Jews received that invitation, and they don't know what to do. Should we go to such a party, celebrating the fact that we're going to be in exile? If we don't go, Achashverosh is a madman. It'll be bad for the Jews. On the other hand, just to be in this country 70 years, to get invited to the White House, it's a big covet. Maybe we should go. They decided to go. And not only did they go, but they enjoyed themselves at the party. They were very happy, and they were proud to be invited, to be considered equal citizens. And they got to the point where it said, this is not a shverk set gullus. If this is gullus, I could be here for another 1,000 years. In fact, they're still there. Some people still in Iran, couple thousand years later. That was the problem. Anytime a Jew feels that gullus is not so bad, and you know what? It's a big deal. We don't go back to Eretz Yisrael. I can see myself being very happy where I am now. Then tremendous promise has occurred to the Jewish people. Famous Meshech Chochmah makes that statement when he talked about it, when he wrote in the 19th century, how in Germany, when the Jews got comfortable in Germany and they took on many prayer books in different denominations of Judaism, took out prayers to return to Zion because there's a new Zion. Western Europe, Germany, the new Vaterland. Berlin is the new Jerusalem. We don't have to pray to go back to Zion. Well, says the Meshech Chochmah in the 19th century already, he predicted a major pogrom coming out of Germany. Unfortunately, he has no idea how right he was going to be. So lesson number one is to try to figure out why the Jews got in the mess that they did, because they forgot about Eretz Yisrael. And they didn't dream of going back to Israel and rebuilding the Bayit Sheni. They dreamed of staying in Persia and helping the Persian Empire. So how do we commemorate that mistake, that the Jews should be able to learn their lesson? I think what they did is that's why they decided to make a 2-day Yontif. 99% of the world, maybe not first years, I don't know how many Jews were in Shushan compared to the other provinces, but for most of Jewish history, 99% of the Jewish world celebrated Purim on the 14th of Adar. Why then was there a need to have a Shushan Purim on the books? Because that reminded people why the whole Purim story started, right? L'teit kavod to Eretz Yisrael. Remember the fact that Persia, you might have been living in a beautiful mansion, but Eretz Yisrael at that point in time lay in a state of destruction. Anytime you forget your roots and where you're trying to get back to, that is a disastrous situation for the Jewish people. So specifically, Shushan Purim was created not to make a separation in the Jewish people to celebrate 2 different days, but to commemorate the fact that, and that's why specifically the definition was made in a way. Remember the time when Yeshua was coming in, and why Dafka Yeshua? Maybe because he was the person who actually led the Jewish people into Eretz Yisrael in the first time. Remember the good days. Remember the excitement we had going into our own country and living the way we wanted to live. That is what we should be dreaming to rebuild, not staying in the exile. Point number one, the Jews failed to remember Eretz Yisrael. Point number two, theme number two. What is the Big Day Kahuna? Also coming from the Big Day Kahuna. Big Day Kahuna were made not only to give honor. I mean, Achashverosh felt he gave him honor. That was it. But there was a more important aspect of the Big Day Kahuna. When you look at the Parsha of Tzav that deals with the Big Day Kahuna, where it was made also l'kadsho u'lechan oli. The whole purpose of the Big Day Kahuna was to make the Kohen Gadol the holiest person of the Jewish people. And when you go to a designer to make a gown, you have a message you want to convey. Sometimes the message is not so tznuah, right? But you want to make a point. Kodesh Baruch Hu was the designer of the Big Day Kahuna. He also wanted to make a point. To create every garment dealt with another character trait that needed to be worked on, with the goal of creating the most sensitive, the most ethical, the most moral and peaceful human being with the greatest connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That was what the Big Day Kahuna represented. The idea of Achashverosh donning the Big Day Kahuna was almost a farce, because he, in his daily life, didn't represent any of the traits that the Big Day Kahuna were meant to build up on. This is theme number two, as a general theme in the story of Purim, the struggle between Bnei Yisrael and Mordechai and Haman, Bnei Yisrael and Amalek. Amalek represents sinat chinam, hatred for no really good reason, simply because they hated God, they hated morality, maybe they even hated themselves. Hatred. Why is it considered sinat chinam? When the Jews left Egypt, they were the first nation to attack us. They weren't part of mainland Eretz Yisrael. They weren't part of the 7 nations. We weren't going to come and attack them and take land from them. But we weren't asking them for money. We weren't asking them for food. We weren't asking them for anything. They had really no reason whatsoever to come to attack us, but simply out of hatred for God and hatred. Maybe they were liberal enough that they always took the underdog. They didn't want to take the side of what seems to be the person who was the oppressor. Now, for 210 years, we were the underdog. Right within a week, we became obviously we went from underdog of the world to the greatest nation in the world. That was something that put us in a bad light for Amalek, and that was it. How do you fight sinat chinam? You fight it with ahavat chinam, with love, not because you owe somebody something or there's a need for payback, simply because you love everybody, you love every human being. That's avas chinam, and that might explain why. Who was the first person to fight Amalek, and maybe it might even explain our question of why we go back to the time of Yeshua ben Nun regarding the Shushan Purim. Because if you look at all the personalities that were commanded to combat Amalek, whether it was the first one, Yehoshua led the first battle in the Midbar when Amalek first attacked. The next person to be given a command to actually fight Amalek, a command to fight Amalek, was Shaul, the first king. And here in the Megillah, Mordechai and Esther, all these personalities, Mordechai and Esther, Shaul, and Yehoshua have a common denominator. They all come from the mother, our mother Rachel. Yehoshua is from Ephraim, and all the rest were from Binyamin. Why Dafka from Rachel and not from the other Imahot? Because the other Imahot, their children have a history of hatred. They hated Joseph, to the extent that they were willing to sell him, possibly even to kill him. They can't be the ones to be successful. They don't have avas chinam. It had to be dafka somebody from Rachel. The battle between Mordechai, between Bnei Israel and Haman are also depicted even within the Parshat Hashavua that is normally read before Purim. And in a year which is not a leap year, the Parsha that is usually read before Purim is a Parsha that Tzav, the Dafka, talks about the Big Day Kahuna. And in that Parsha, Moshe Rabbeinu's name is not mentioned. There are many reasons given to that, but the most common one that everybody knows, because at one point Moshe said after the Chet HaEgel, when God said, I want to destroy the Jewish people for the sin of the golden calf, and I'm going to start over just from you, Moshe said, absolutely not. I won't have it. If that's the way it's got to be, Macheni na misifracha. Wipe me out of the book. I'm not willing to do that. I'm not going to have them be destroyed at my, just to give me some cover. That's the way Jew. That's a person who's Big Day Kahuna. That's the person who lives for other people, is concerned about himself, other people, not by himself, as opposed to Haman, a descendant of Amalek, where the Gemara asks Haman min Torah minayin, where is there a hint for Haman in the Torah? And they quote the pasuk in Bereshis, Hamina eitz, Shamati l'chalotucha mimena chalta. God asked Adam and Chava, have you eaten from the tree that I told you not to eat from? Hamin ha'etz, hey mem nun, the word Haman. Great. I found a pasuk where I have a hey mem nun combination. What's the connection? Haman lived only for himself. 99.9% of the world bowed down and worshipped Haman. There was only one person who refused to bow down to Haman, and that person was Mordechai. And that wasn't enough for him. He couldn't tolerate that. He had destroyed the entire nation of Klal Yisrael because of Mordechai. Just like in Gan Eden, Adam Rishon and Chava were placed in paradise with the opportunity to eat from any tree in the Gan that they wanted to. There was only one tree that was denied them. And Dafka, that was it. If they couldn't have every single tree, including that one, it wasn't worth it for them. And they violated. So reason number two, or the message of customs, is what was the custom that Achashverosh wore? What did it try to promote? A totally different type of personality than we see in Haman. And we have to remember that. We as Jewish people, not only do we remember Eretz Yisrael, remember Bein Adam L'Chaveiro. Remember the type of individuals we're supposed to be and the light to the world that we're supposed to be. Maybe that will explain two more of the questions that we had. Matanis L'Avyonim, and Mishloach Manot. Because we have a special halacha tzedakah, and we give gifts to people who don't even need it, because we want to demonstrate avat chinam. We love people. We're going to demonstrate our love for people because they're created in the image of God, and we go to the opposite extreme of sin'ah. There might be another possible connection, and this is a connection that maybe I'm putting in simply to be yotzei the Parshat Hashavua. In if you look in, we just read in Parshat Zohar, and when we talked about Amalek, the Parsha there at the end of it's I think in Perek Chafei in Devarim, the end of Parshat Kitzesei, talked about the fact that where did Amalek attack you? Ki korcha baderach, korcha baderach. They happened to meet you on the road. And Rashi and Chazal are bothered by what does the word korcha mean? And Rashi gives several possibilities. One of the possibilities that Rashi gives is the word korcha means like kar v'chom, cold and hot. You were boiling. You were really hot when you came out of Mitzrayim. The whole world looked at you. You were a slave nation that basically walked out of the most powerful nation of the world without firing a shot, without a bullet, just walked out. And you brought Egypt to its knees. And the whole world saw the power of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It was a time possibly to go back to the days pre-Chet and Gan Eden to start a whole new chapter where the whole world would come and recognize God. That was the hope and the anticipation of the Jewish people. Who was the first person who said, I don't want to have a nation who said, I don't want anything to do with that? That was Amalek. They came, Korach Abderach, they cooled you down, as the Rashi brings the Chazal. It's like somebody jumps into a boiling pot of water. Now he may get killed and get scalded, but it makes it easier for the next person to try. Well, maybe I'll have better luck than the first person. You do the unthinkable, all of a sudden it becomes accepted. And we as Jews can't do that. Why is that a dangerous thing? Because you have to ask yourself, why did Amalek get to be as rotten as they were? You'll say, well, maybe they come from Esav, but Esav is not Amalek even. Esav didn't come attack us. Only Amalek did. Because it could be what the Torah is telling us, the problem of Korcha is because Esav himself was enthusiastic about sports, about hunting, but he wasn't enthusiastic about spirituality and coming close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yeah, he grew up in a house of Esav, of Yitzchak, and he may have his own red lines, but because he was cold, then there was problematic. And in fact, this idea of being enthusiastic about service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu was found in this week's Parshat. In the beginning of Parshat Tzav, in Perek Vav, you notice in the psukim start off Perek Vav pasuk Beis. Tzav esaron v'espanav le'mor zos Torah ha'olah hi ha'olah al mokda al mizbeach kol halayla. Right. Ada boker ve'esh mizbeach tukad bo. The word of mukdah should be burned on the mizbeach is repeated. We'll see it's repeated in Perek pasuk Hey and Vav. Ve'esh al mizbeach tukad bo. Right, the fire on the mizbeach should be kept burning. Lo tichbeh, it should not be extinguished. Ubir la kohen eitzim baboker. The kohen had to put wood on it in the morning and at night. Every morning. Varach aleha olah, and put the olah offering on it. Viktir la chal be'ashalmim. Eish tamid tukad al mizbeach lo tichbeh. The fire must constantly be burning on the mizbeach. It is not to be extinguished. And distinguish it could be. The word tukad is mentioned 4 or 5 times within the pasuk, and it's interesting in pasuk Hey and Vav, you have a double mitzvah saseh and a double lo saseh. It's repeated twice, right? It says fire had to be on the altar, by both cases, And it says lo tichbeh 2 times, repeated within one pasuk right after the other. Why? So the Balei Musa say, because what applies to the Mizbeach applies to the human being as well. We have an obligation to never allow our fire, right, our desire to come close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be extinguished, even a little bit. In fact, the Rambam brings down that what does it mean you have to have the fire can never go out? Doesn't mean that what happens if I take one coal from the fire? There's still a large fire on the Mizbeach, but I'm going to take one coal and blow it out. You violate a lo saseh, a negative commandment. You can't allow your enthusiasm to go away, even the smallest amount. Right? That is another thing we learn from Amalek. They try to cool us down in our enthusiasm for Kadosh Baruch Hu. We have to keep the fire on our personal mizbeach burning 24/7, and not even allow one coal to be extinguished. There's a second shot there, by the way. If you look in Rashi in Kitzeise, what does it mean, korcha baderech? And Rashi says it means lashon mikra. Another philosophical debate between Amalek and the Jewish people was: do they bring in hashgacha pratis? Do they believe that God looks over the world, or is everything is by chance? Amalek believed that everything was by chance. We have a totally different shot. And this, by the way, is also seen within the Psukim in this week's Parshat that we just read. What does it mean? That, again, we have this command mentioned twice. Pasuk 2 positive commandments, 2 negative commandments. The fire can never, ever, ever go out. Kohanim had to bring wood every single day to make sure they were stockpiled, make sure that was it. Question, of course, comes in: why? Why did we have to bring our own fire? We know that the korbanot on the mizbeach were primarily eaten by the eish that came in Hashemayim. It was miraculous eish. They didn't need really our eish. So why did we go through all that trouble? And why was we so makbid to tell me that make sure the fire doesn't go out, and with psukim repeated twice in pasuk hey and vav? Why? When he had the eish Hashemayim anyway? Because the idea is God. This tells us about the whole way God runs the world. God doesn't make it obvious that there is someone watching over the world. There is a concept of hester panim. God tries to hide his presence as much as possible, to give us the opportunity to come to HaKadosh Baruch Hu based on a free will decision, right? Because if we saw a miracle, then it'd be hard for us not to deny the existence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And by nature, God separated him. He left himself up in Shemayim, and only in the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim did he break the rule and have open revelation. And also the idea, a second thing is, if a miracle will keep happening, if we saw the miracle of the Aish every single day, we would get used to it. We would think it become like nature, just like the sun, right? The sun coming up every single day and never late, never sleeps in even one day. And what the sun does as far as light and as far as heat and life in our planet, it's such an unbelievable miracle, but we take it for granted. When's the last time you woke up and wanted to see sunrise, especially if sunrise was very early? Yeah, it's a miracle, but since it happens every day, it loses its significance. God didn't want you to be able to see fire coming down from Shemayim every day. He wanted you to assume that it was man-made, so that if fire did on occasion come down openly, you would be impressed by it. And that's the concept of hester panim, right? Which is again an extremely, and I think perhaps the most critical idea contained within the idea of Purim. I always tell the story when I give this year. A number of years ago, we were having Purim Suda, and students came in to the Suda. I remember these were students who were coming to the Suda, where they was coming for Shlach Manos. And one of my students came in, a girl dressed inappropriately. Skirt was too short, sleeves were too short, the neckline was a little bit short. She comes in. We had an elderly woman who was our next door neighbor, Holocaust survivor, about bayit by us, who was eating at the Suda from his. she's sitting there watching this, and this student comes in, gives me a big hug, plants this wet kiss on my cheek right in front of my wife. And I thought this woman was going to have a heart attack, until she found out 20 seconds later that this wasn't a girl who was acting inappropriately. Actually, it was a guy acting. It was one of my male students who got dressed up as a girl, looked better as a girl than he did as a guy. Now, today we might wonder, it might have other ramifications, but what is the whole idea of costumes? The whole idea of costume is what seems to be obvious on the outside may not necessarily represent the reality within. That's the whole concept of another major concept of the Purim story. Why God's name is not mentioned within the Megillah openly. There are no open miracles in Purim. It's not like it's Yas Mitzrayim. Exact opposite. Coincidence, too many coincidences to be coincidental. To tell you that a Kodesh Baruch Hu was there from the beginning of the story to the end of the story, God's watching over us. There is no such thing. God separates from the Jewish people. That will explain many of the other questions that we had. Number one, why must we combine the celebration of Purim with the fast day of Tanis Esther? Because to tell us that just as God was with us at our victory at the end of the story, don't think that God abandoned us in the beginning of the story that required the fasting. God was equally there at both times, and therefore it's important that both parts of the story be commemorated. Number one. Number two, why do we read the Megillah twice? And why specifically once at night and once during the day? Because of the fact is that the message of the Megillah is as equally relevant during the dark times of Jewish history, namely the nighttime of Jewish history, as it is during the good times of Jewish history during the day. And that's why the Megillah must be read specifically once at night and once during the day, because the message, God is there and with us, even though we don't see him in the darkness, God is there in both situations. Also, why do we eat humatash? What's the symbolism there? The way I think humatash should be made is, what's the outside of humatash? Plain flour and water, a dry cookie that if you were going to a bakery and everything was the same price, and you had a choice between chocolate mousse cake and a dry cookie, you would take the chocolate mousse cake. But what you fail to realize is from the outside, yeah, it's a dry cookie, but you don't know that hidden within is a sweet filling. You have to bite into the humatash to realize the sweet center that was concealed by the outside. The idea of Hester Panim, which is something that Amalek did not believe in. They believed everything was chance, and God doesn't control the world and know what's going on. And so that, I think, is the three major themes of Purim. The idea of remembering Eretz Yisrael, right? It's the whole cause why we got into trouble in the first place. Remember the classic battle, Amalek versus Klal Yisrael, in many different realms. The realm of Ben Adam Chavero, Avaskinam versus Sinaskinam, in the realm of Korcha Baderech, whether it's we have to feel warm towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu and be excited on a daily basis to wake up every day, be able to do mitzvahs and have another day to connect with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Never let that fade. And the idea with Amalek also that the Hester Panim, there is no mikras, nothing is by chance. The idea that Kadosh Baruch Hu is with us at all time. I'd like to just end with why we don't say Hallel, right? Because at the end of this whole story, you would think that the Jews were almost killed 70 years after Churban Bayis Rishon, but they've learned their lesson. They've learned all the lessons we talked about. They learned about they made a mistake by their. They learned all these lessons, so that subsequently, when the Jews were given permission to go back to Eretz Yisrael, Achashverosh, Haman is deposed. Esther and Mordechai become major leaders. Esther has a child. The child is Jewish. It's ironically, a Jew becomes the king of the Persian Empire on the death of Ahasuerus, and he allows the Jewish people to go back and rebuild the Beis Hamikdash. How many Jews took up the challenge and came back to rebuild the Second Temple? How many even religious Jews came back to rebuild the Second Temple? Less than 10%. Most of the Jewish population, like even after everything that occurred to them, decided to stay in Persia. Very similar, right? To think, well, for those people who don't learn from history, they make the same mistakes. You would think that after what the Jewish people went through during World War II, and 6 million of our people were murdered, how many nations even were willing to take in refugees when they knew it meant being killed? Not even the United States of America. And yet, 2 or 3 years later, establishment of the State of Israel, what is the percentage of the Jewish people that took up the call to try and rebuild the Bayit Shlishi? Unfortunately, not greater numbers than in the Purim story. That might explain why we don't say Hallel. Hallel would be if we really got the message and the job was done. The job is not yet done. Right? God has ways to bring back the Jewish people. I just read an article this morning in the Post. They're making arrangements for possibly 100,000 Olim from Ukraine. Chaval that they had to come under these horrible circumstances. Many of us have the opportunity to come to Eretz Yisrael and make Aliyah in positive circumstances. We should all learn the lesson of Purim, right? Learn the lesson of Parshat Tzav, to have a burning desire to come back to Eretz Yisrael, burning desire to get close to Kadosh Baruch Hu. We shall all be zocheh that next year we all celebrate Purim here in Eretz Yisrael. Purim Sameach, Shabbat Shalom.